If there is a job where the silence of the night can hide more than it seems, it's the work of a gravedigger. Whoever passes through a cemetery by day sees only tombstones and flowers. But at night, when the gates close and the city sleeps, that place takes on a different tone, a space where inexplicable things can manifest. Among those who live daily with death, some stories go beyond what can be understood. In today's episode, I tell some of those stories. While you're here, allow me to keep you company as you go about your daily tasks, whether tidying the house, preparing a meal, or simply enjoying a moment of rest, disconnecting from your problems for a while. If you can, put on your favorite headphones, prepare a hot drink, or whatever you prefer, and let's go to today's episode. Story 1. Good evening. I was never the type to be easily impressed by ghost stories, but what I lived through last year made me rethink everything. I decided to write to you because I need to take this weight off my chest and maybe understand if someone has gone through something similar. If before I thought it was all just rumors from superstitious people. Today I admit there are things we can't explain. My name is Christopher. I'm 48 years old and I've worked as a gravedigger for over 2 decades. I live in a small town in rural North Carolina and I've always liked it here. I'm not a fearful person. I learned to deal with the routine of burials and the constant presence of death without major shakes. Yet what happened to me a few months ago still makes me lose sleep. And now, with everything still fresh in my memory, I feel it's a good idea to share this experience with your subscribers. It happened at the municipal cemetery where I work every night from Monday to Friday, doing the rounds and making sure nothing gets out of place. My shift has always been the night shift because, unlike most people, I even enjoyed the silence and calm of that hour. If it weren't for that routine, maybe I wouldn't have noticed something so strange. At first, it was just another ordinary week, quiet burials, no big movement, but one detail began to catch my attention. Every day before leaving, I did a quick check in certain areas. It was in one of those checks that I noticed the earth on a specific grave looked different from the day before, as if someone had disturbed that soil. My first thought was that it was just the action of the rain, but it hadn't rained that week. Even so, the soil was clearly turned, a little looser, with subtle marks as if human hands had touched it. The next day, I came earlier to check if the situation continued. To my surprise, the earth was again turned over, as if someone had dug a deeper hole. I worried it might be vandalism, so I decided to alert administration. They recommended placing stones around the grave to make access harder and, if necessary, install a small barrier. I spent a large part of my shift collecting heavy stones and arranging them around the grave. I confess I felt no fear then, only curiosity and irritation, thinking some prankster was desecrating a resting place. I tried to convince myself it was not supernatural. After all, there are always youngsters who like mean-spirited jokes. Still, the persistence of whomever it was put a bug in my ear. I imagined it would be only a matter of time until I caught the person in the act. For my frustration, reinforcing the grave didn't help much. The next morning, the scene was the same, as if the stones had been moved and put back carelessly. That made no sense. Some of the rocks I used were really heavy and took effort to move. I began to wonder if someone from the cemetery itself was involved, perhaps a co-worker or a visitor with free access. I spoke with Gerald, a colleague who sometimes does rounds with me, and he mentioned that he'd noticed the stones out of place on a day he arrived early, but he hadn't given it much thought. Meanwhile, my curiosity turned into constant anxiety. I needed to find out what was happening, if only to prove that it was a human action. So I decided I would hide at night near the grave to try to catch the supposed culprit. The idea didn't please me, but I could no longer ignore the problem. I thought better a sleepless night than continue living with the doubt. The following night, I arrived at the cemetery a few minutes early and positioned myself near a row of tall graves where larger headstones provided natural hiding spots. I crouched behind a mausoleum with a racing heart, feeling an unease I'd never experienced in all my years on the job. The silence was almost absolute except for the faint wind through the trees and an occasional distant street noise. Each time I heard a sound, my heart jumped. Around 1:30 a.m., my phone began to show low battery. I considered retreating and trying a safer approach, but I was determined to continue. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I heard light footsteps mixed with the sound of earth being moved. I followed the noise cautiously, keeping the flashlight pointed at the ground. My stomach churned. I was ready to turn the light on and shout if it was someone messing with the grave. As I rounded a headstone, I saw the silhouette of someone kneeling in the dirt, apparently digging with their hands. I switched the flashlight on impulse and nearly dropped everything from the shock. The figure was a very pale child, about 9 or 10 years old, with deep-set eyes and clothes dirty with earth. The strangeness of the situation left me speechless. She did not seem surprised by my presence. She simply continued to dig as if I didn't exist. I tried to say something, to ask if she was lost, but my voice came out weak and the child only turned her head slowly toward me. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. She did not blink like a normal child. A hollow feeling, a cold ran through my body, and a thought crossed my mind. What would a child be doing there alone in the middle of the night? I approached cautiously, keeping the flashlight low, and asked again if she was okay, if she needed help. Nothing. She just raised her hands, covered in dirt, as if trying to show me something. At that point, my heart was nearly out of my throat, and my instincts screamed for me to turn and run. I thought about calling the police, but something told me that if I took my eyes off her, she would vanish. Then I heard a branch snap behind me. My whole body froze. I swung the light around, but there was nobody. When I turned back, the child had stood up and taken a few steps backward. I could not hold back a muffled shout of surprise and nearly stepped toward her, but something primitive stopped me. She simply turned and ran into the darkness between the headstones. The next day, after much thought, I told Gerald what I had seen. He noticed my nervous state and said it sounded like I'd seen a ghost. He even apologized for not staying with me during the vigil, but claimed he thought I would handle it alone. We spoke with administration and checked cemetery records. There was no recent child burial there, nor anything that justified a child's presence. The director called the police, who did a patrol the next day but found no evidence of vandalism or children. Despite everything, I insisted on investigating on my own, trying to find any relative or visitor who might have information. No one seemed to know of any child frequenting the place. The following weeks were torment. I could no longer sleep properly, afraid of what I might encounter the next night. I asked to change to the day shift, but there was no vacancy. I tried to resist, but the memory of that pale child haunted me every minute. In the end, I resigned, even after more than 20 years of service. I don't feel proud of having abandoned a job that was part of my life, but I could no longer set foot in that cemetery without fearing the possibility of reliving that terror. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, whether it was an abandoned child, someone playing a trick on me, or something truly supernatural. The only certainty I have is that after that experience, I began to believe there are things to which we have no answers. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive upcoming stories. Your presence is important and your support is essential. Well, let's continue. Second story. Good evening. My name is Ricardo, and this whole thing unfolded in a town in inland California. Even though I don't like drawing attention, I feel that sharing this may give me some peace of mind. I know some will doubt me, but my hope is that anyone who has gone through something similar will feel less alone hearing my story. It all began when I started working at the town cemetery a little over a year ago. I had been unemployed for months, and an acquaintance mentioned the old gravedigger had retired. At first I hesitated because I handled death and the darker side of life poorly, but the electricity bill doesn't care, so I accepted. The cemetery routine was less heavy than I imagined, although sometimes I felt discomfort staying late or opening old graves to check for infiltration. The administrator, Mr. Edward, was a serious, few-words man, but very organized with records. He kept everything noted in an old book with dates and names, checking each detail. It was in this routine that, 2 months ago, they told me to prepare a grave for a burial scheduled 2 days from then in the oldest area of the cemetery. I found it strange because I almost never needed to work that part. The older graves are rarely revisited. But I went ahead. While digging, I noticed the soil was looser than usual, as if someone had already disturbed it shortly before. I thought it could be due to the recent rains that had soaked the ground the last few days. While shoveling, I struck something of wood, already a bit rotten. My first reaction was to stop and check the register book, because nothing indicated a coffin there. I called Mr. Edward to confirm we were in the right place. He came, checked the paperwork with a furrowed brow, but didn't seem surprised at all. He just said, "Close it, and let's continue where indicated for the burial." Leave it as is. That made me uncomfortable. He had always been methodical, so why ignore a coffin without a record? When he walked away, I decided to climb down into the grave to understand what was happening. I went down carefully using an improvised ladder and shone my phone light into the area. The smell wasn't as strong as I would expect from a very old burial, which already struck me as odd. I forced the rotten lid aside to see what was inside. I thought at most I'd find bones, but when I finally opened it, I nearly dropped my phone from the shock. There was a body in an advanced state of decomposition, but not as much as I would expect for someone buried decades ago. The skin, despite pale and partially deteriorated, still covered much of the face, and the dark suit he wore was in better condition than one would imagine for something that old. Not intact, but it gave the impression it hadn't been buried for that long. A bad feeling took over me. I climbed out almost running and went to call Mr. Edward again, breathless. His reaction was to tell me to leave it alone and not to interfere with the funeral that was scheduled. I asked if we should call the police, and he said he would handle it with those responsible for the cemetery, but gave no clear explanation. He was more irritated than frightened, which only increased my suspicions. The story distressed me. A coffin without a record and a body that hadn't decomposed as expected. I decided to call the police myself. While dialing, I remember feeling a shiver, as if someone was watching me from afar. It took a few minutes to explain the situation to the person who answered, who seemed skeptical. In the end, they said they would send someone to check the next day, but they didn't sound too worried. The next morning, 2 patrol cars arrived and asked me to take them to the grave. I was becoming nervous, wondering if I had overreacted, but as soon as the officers saw the body, one of them turned pale and pulled the other aside to talk. They took photos, made notes, and said they needed to take the body for autopsy. At that point, Mr. Edward reappeared, questioning why we had called the police, and started arguing with the officers. He denied knowing of any irregularity and complained it would disrupt the cemetery's routine. The police did not back down. In the days that followed, the town heard about the event. Some local newspapers and radio briefly mentioned that an unidentified coffin had been found, but the story quickly disappeared from the news. I don't know if political pressures or simple disinterest caused that, but the impact wasn't as big as I expected. Then strange calls began. 1 or 2 times a week the phone would ring, and when I answered, there was only silence. Maybe prank calls, but the coincidence felt odd. I was genuinely frightened when I found strange scribbles on the gate of my house. Graffiti that could be dismissed as kids' mischief, but it bothered me. Even worse was a rumor I heard at the local grocery. They said the body had vanished from the morgue, but no official confirmation existed. I asked people in the local police, and they couldn't say for sure. The autopsy was inconclusive, and these processes can take time. I honestly don't know if the body really disappeared or if it's gossip, but the uncertainty is enough to make me anxious, especially since I was the one who found it. Maybe paranoia, but it seemed the whole town looked at me sideways for having opened my mouth. Mr. Edward also disappeared suddenly, leaving the job without explanation. Some said he went to care for relatives in West Virginia. Others said he was pressured to leave because of the investigation. I, for my part, quit that job and took odd work in a nearby town, rented a small room, and left. I still dream about that half-preserved face, the old clothes, and the rotting lid. I can't say there was something supernatural in that grave, but I can't explain what happened, and maybe I never will. If there is a lesson, it's that we are not always prepared to meddle where we were not called. And sometimes those who keep secrets are more frightening than any horror story we hear. Before we go to the last report, if you're still here, comment on the time you're watching. I'd like to know who's watching. The reports until the end. Well, let's go. Third story. What I'm about to tell happened about a month ago, and I still wake up at night sweating, feeling like something or someone is tracking my every move. I've worked as a gravedigger in a small cemetery for almost 10 years. In all that time, I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing left me as disturbed as this. I decided to tell this story here because I don't have the courage to talk to anyone in person, and maybe getting it off my chest will ease my nightmares. I'm not seeking internet fame, nor do I want to convince anyone. I just need to lift this weight from my head. I promise I'll report everything exactly as it happened without embellishment. I only ask that if you listen to the end, you be understanding, because I still don't know how to digest what I witnessed. My name is Ismael, and I live alone in a little room in the back of the cemetery by choice and for convenience with the job. I've always been a calm person with no great ambitions. I liked the quiet of the nights. The management entrusted me with the night rounds not only to ensure no one breaks in, but also to check the safety of the oldest graves. At first, I confess I felt some fear walking among the graves in the pitch dark, but over time I got used to the noises, the shadows, and even the cats that wander around. Keeping order, checking for damaged headstones or vandalism became routine. The calm nights, strange as they may seem to some, brought me a certain peace, a time to reflect on life. But about a month ago, that peace was completely destroyed, and I still cannot get back to my routine the same way. It all started with silhouettes I swore I saw in the old section of the cemetery. I always thought it might be my imagination or a reflection of some strange light. The first time I noticed the silhouette, I was doing rounds around 2 a.m., holding my flashlight and checking that the gates were locked. Passing the old section, I felt that chill, like someone was behind me watching. I turned quickly and shone the light, but I saw nothing. Only old graves, some half destroyed by time and the usual silence. The next day, I half mentioned it to Cicero, a young guy who cleans in the morning, and he laughed, saying I must be tired or scared of cats. Still, I paid closer attention the following nights, and to my surprise, I continued to spot that silhouette, always crouched in the same place as if prodding the soil. It would vanish as quickly as it appeared, smoke in the air, when I moved the flashlight. I began to think it might be a beggar or a thief trying to unearth something of value, but I couldn't understand how a person could move so fast. I started timing almost exactly when I used to see it, to try to catch it red-handed. As the days passed, my anxiety grew, and I realized I was becoming obsessed with the apparition. I even neglected parts of my rounds just to stay and wait to see the silhouette. It kept appearing, always crouched and appearing to move the soil. But every time I turned the light on, there was no soil disturbance, no trace. That started to play with my head because it made no sense how something could disappear so quickly and leave no trace. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia or fatigue, but each night the feeling of being stared at grew stronger. I didn't share this with anyone. I imagined the jokes people would make, and honestly, if it had been some time ago, I would have laughed too. Still, I decided I needed to understand what was happening to prove I wasn't losing my mind. One cold night, I approached on surprise without switching the flashlight on, hoping to catch whatever it was. I prepared differently. I set the flashlight to its weakest mode and held a small wooden stick in case it was an intruder. I waited until almost 3 a.m., when the cold wind already made my hands tremble, and walked carefully toward the old section, stepping lightly to avoid noise. Each step my heart beat faster, and I kept telling myself to remain calm. When I reached the decrepit graves, I finally saw it. The same silhouette, crouched as if scouring the ground with its own nails. This time I froze and didn't point the light immediately. I wanted to see its shape, size. It looked like a very thin, almost skeletal person, nearly 2 meters tall when crouched, at least taller than me. Its skin was so pale it reflected the scant moonlight passing between clouds. I felt as if that being was not breathing. It made no sound beyond the scraping of its hands in the earth. Part of me wanted to run, but curiosity kept me rooted. When I finally raised the flashlight slowly without pointing it directly, I noticed something even more terrifying. Its eyes were black, almost like deep holes carved into a cadaverous face. It was like staring at an animal in the dark, but there was something human about it, or at least something pretending to be human. My stomach turned with fear. At that moment it seemed to notice me, and in a sudden movement, turned its head toward me and emitted a low growl, a sound I never thought would come from a human throat. I took a step back and tripped over a small headstone behind me. The flashlight briefly illuminated its face. That fleeting glimpse was enough to see those deep cavities under the eyes, stretched skin, and something that made me want to vomit: the long, dirty nails covered in soil. As soon as the light hit it, the thing disappeared with the same speed as always, but this time not only did it flee quickly, it seemed to disintegrate into the air, leaving only small clods of disturbed soil and a hollow feeling like I was completely alone. I stayed in shock, not knowing where to look or what to do. My mind insisted this couldn't be real, but the sweat on my face and the tightness in my chest made clear I was awake. I checked if anyone was around, looked behind headstones, and even verified the gate was closed. There was no living soul, only that disturbing silence. I went back to my little room trying to organize my thoughts, but barely slept that night. I couldn't get that image out of my head, nor the sound of nails digging in the earth. The next morning I went to the grave where I had seen the creature, expecting to find signs that someone had been digging. To my surprise, the soil was intact. No marks, no holes. I stood there for minutes wondering if my mind had invented the terror. However, when I checked the plaque that identifies the grave, I received a huge shock. The name on the tombstone was of a well-known local man, but I was absolutely certain that man was still alive. I had seen him talking with Cicero 2 days earlier at a bar in the main square. My heart raced and I kept turning that information over in my head. Why would that creature be disturbing a grave that shouldn't exist, or that at least shouldn't be occupied? The whole situation seemed like a grotesque clerical error or a tasteless prank, but considering what I had witnessed the night before, I couldn't convince myself it was just paperwork. I went to the small office where we keep registration and looked for Mr. Seraphim's name. I found an old file from more than 20 years back indicating there were remains of a relative of that man, but there was no mention that he would have the same name. Nothing made sense. I felt trapped in a bureaucratic maze, and the memory of the cadaverous face and the black eyes continued to haunt me. My hands sweated and I couldn't concentrate, constantly glancing over my shoulder for fear that figure would appear behind me again. Worse was thinking that if I felt like this in daylight, how would I face another night in the cemetery? Like in horror movies, curiosity and fear walk hand in hand. That same night, I decided to do the rounds with even more caution. My flashlight seemed weak against the darkness between the graves. I tried to avoid the old section, but at the same time felt I had to pass there to make sure nothing worse was happening. When I approached Mr. Seraphim's grave, my heart sped up again, as if the air around me had grown heavy and dense. I called out, "Anyone there?" and heard only the echo of my voice. No silhouette, no creature, only the shadow of the trees in the wind. But even unseen, I felt it staring at me. For a moment I considered the figure might be connected to Mr. Seraphim's health, some kind of omen. But it made no rational sense. The fact that nothing fit into any logical explanation is what torments me most. I didn't confront Mr. Seraphim in town because I didn't want to sound crazy. I discreetly tried to research whether his health had declined or there was talk of his death, but everyone said he was fit and healthy. Still, each night I heard that scraping in my memory like something calling me back there. I don't know what that creature wants or why it was so desperate to open that empty grave. I keep doing rounds, but now I live with constant fear, looking into every corner waiting for it to appear. The worst part is I still have no answers, and each day I feel more alone in this story. Maybe one day I'll have the courage to talk to Mr. Seraphim, or to someone who will take me seriously, but for now I can only report what I saw and hope I don't encounter that macabre being again. Honestly, I don't know if next time I would make it out alive. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every week. I hope to see you here in the next ones.